Hi, this is Lee Cocker, founder of Prince Party. Today we have got a very, very special guest that has been on our dream list for a very, very long time. And with me tonight is Paddy.
Good evening.
Andy.
Hello.
And Chopin. And I will let Chopin do the introduction.
Hello. Well, tonight, like Lee said, we've got an amazing guest, someone we've been looking forward to talk to. Producer, studio engineer, author and academic at Berklee College of Music, and I'm sure most of you know was there for some of the most important moments in pop creation. Professor Susan Rogers, welcome to the show.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
You are so welcome. Hope you're doing well today. And
yeah, everything's good. It's wonderful to be here in Valencia, Spain, visiting our Berklee campus and talking with the students. And, I'm very excited to see that many of them have an interest in Prince. What you're afraid of course, is that this great artist will be lost to history because the young people won't be interested in him. But yeah, they know who Prince is.
That's so good to know. And how do you feel like when somebody young, somebody asks you about him or somebody mentions him who may not even know your connection at the college?
At the college, because they're music students, they do know my contribution. But I think outside the college, I think a lot of young people know Prince. They won't necessarily know my name, nor do they need to. I'm just honestly, from the bottom of my heart, really happy when Prince gets the attention that he so justly deserves. There were ways in his life that he aimed to avoid attention. And that, I think, certainly that was a conscious choice. But he wanted to let the music speak for itself. And now we've got his body of work. And I think he would be very, very, very happy if anyone finds his body of work and has an opinion about him as an artist.
Susan, I think everything you say is going to send me off in 20 directions at once, because already I'm really fascinated by the idea that young kids of this generation, do know who Prince is, want to know about Prince. And I read and loved your book, This Is What It Sounds Like. And you talk about one of the factors in music being sort of novelty and something new that people haven't heard before, and how difficult it is sometimes for the younger generation to appreciate something like how revolutionary Michael Jackson and Prince's and Madonna's music was back in the day, for example. Yes. But you're finding they do hear it with fresh ears, or...
They hear it. I'm laughing because they don't understand analog tape. They don't understand what it was like to make a record with only 24 tracks and how that constrained your production and your techniques and the sounds that you put onto your records. So it's funny because I played them today. I was in a production class and they wanted to hear some of my work, and I played some things from the 90s, and some of them were alternative indie pieces, and they're from the 90s. And there was a certain sound that we got for our drums and for our vocals and certain kinds of distortion that we loved in the 90s in alternative indie. It was the sound of the day. And to their ears, it sounded pretty... I'm sure it sounded pretty foreign. And most of them asked, well, why did you do the drums like that? And I had to explain, to be competitive, because that's how we did the drums back then. So I played one... I was demonstrating a vocal technique, and I played a record from the early 1950s, an Ella Fitzgerald record. And the one student asked, was there a problem with the equipment? and I said, no, to the contrary, that was as good as it got, in 1947. What was that sound that went, shh? It's tape hiss. It's tape hiss. So when they hear Prince today, when they, being young people, hear him today, they're listening with 21st century ears. Mm-hmm. And they're listening for the things that they're used to. And that's going to be sampled drums, and it's going to be an absence of tape hiss. It's going to be an awful lot of sounds today that they think, well, this is just how music sounds. But it didn't sound like that in the 80s. So hats off to anyone who is sharp enough to recognize that to hear this music in the context of its day, appreciate it then, and you know, extrapolate from there and try to hear it through old ears as well as today's ears, and still appreciate it.
Just curious with saying that, for yourself, where did your relationship with music begin? And like, on an autobiographical playlist, what would be your track number one, the one that kind of, opened you up to music?
I loved it, like a lot of kids do. I'm sure all of you did when you were young. You just love it, and you're attracted to it, and it seems important. And just as some kids are attracted to sports or whatever else they're doing. But I always loved it. But I remember I had a couple of early epiphanies. One was, okay, pardon me for this. When I was about 7 years old and the Beatles are coming up, and all the neighborhood kids love the Beatles. They're crazy about the Beatles. And I'm 7, and I'm listening with a discriminating ear. And I remember thinking, it's good, but I don't have the fervor that they have. And then when Motown came out around the same time, I remember thinking, it's good, and still being intensely interested in it, but not having that fervor. And the first time that I felt, oh yeah, now that's what I'm talking about, was to a James Brown record. Yay. And I was 9 years old, and it just, I don't know what it was, but I still remember that moment. And I remember feeling, now this is the excitement that I'm feeling right now, is what I assume the other kids were feeling to the Beatles and to the Motown records. It just seemed to, I don't know, it resonated. And the term I like to use is a resonant frequency. It just felt right. And right around that time, I heard a long extended version. FM radio was just starting up, and I heard the extended version of Buffalo Springfield Bluebird. And Stephen Stills, at the end, they go into kind of a breakdown and kind of a jam. And Stephen Stills is a great guitar player, and he's doing this blues moaning thing. And I remember thinking, this feels right. I'm so interested in how children respond to some things more strongly than to others. And who knows, it's still a mystery where that comes from, but you know it when you feel it. So those were some early music experiences that showed me, as Prince would put it, the street I live on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And James Brown, that's a shared street, I imagine, with Prince.
Yeah, I think there was a beautiful moment. Oh, this was great. I had just joined Prince, and we were at his home studio on Kiowa Trail in Chanhassen doing some recording. It was a bedroom studio, and Morris Day was there, and I think it might have been, I don't think it was Jerome, it might have been Jelly Bean, but a couple of guys from the time. They're talking about music, and I'm being quiet. I'm in the role of a servant here, and they don't know me that well, so they're doing all the talking. Of course, I'm not joining in. I'm here to serve. But I think it was Morris who mentioned a track by One Way featuring Al Hudson, and I just let out a oh, and they looked at me, and I went, I love that song. And I remember all three faces, and I remember the recognition on their face that if you know One Way featuring Al Hudson, you listen to the same music that we listen to. And of course I did. I listened to R&B and soul radio. In Los Angeles, I had plenty more to choose from than they did in Minneapolis. They had the one station, but we had several. And over time, Prince began to recognize his frame of reference was the same as mine. I'd listened to the same records.
And when because you're listening to the same records, and obviously Prince and the time aren't replicating those records, they're making their own sound. But does having that anchor in the same musical avenue help you when engineering their sound and finding the sounds that they're looking for?
To be frank, yes, it would have if I had been hired as an engineer. But in fact, Prince hired me as his audio technician to repair his equipment. And straight away, he and Jesse Johnson of the time taught me their sound. Jesse, in particular, taught me this is how the hi-hat should sound. Here's how the kick should sound. Prince, with his examples, would ask for certain reverb settings. And me being an engineer, I can get him what he wants. He's showing me what he considers good timbres, good sound palettes. So honestly, I learned his ear, and it was a unique ear because of the way that he arranges music. After I left Prince, having done all those records with him, his was the only ear I knew how to match. So I only knew Prince engineering. My career after Prince struggled for a couple of years because I was trying to apply his sounds to other people's records. And it wasn't working. I did a Candy Dulfer record, the saxophonist, where that came pretty close. But I worked with Al B. Sure, the songwriter-producer Al B. Sure, on a Tevin Campbell record. You can't use Prince sounds on a Tevin Campbell record. It's not going to work. And he's a sweetheart of a man, and he helped explain what it was he was looking for a straight up R&B record. And then, of course, I learned the alternative indie where I did much of my work. But yeah, I can't say that I brought anything to Prince, although I did have a receptivity to an awareness of the rhythm on records and how the elements should fit together, how all the rhythmic elements need to combine. I'm certain, 100% certain, that awareness of his frame of reference helped me.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, of course, everybody in this chat today loves and has been listening to Prince and loving Prince for decades now. And a big part of that is the sound. And I often think that when people don't like Prince or don't yet like Prince, some of them, it's because they just haven't heard it with those ears. And then for some people, I think suddenly they hear one track that talks to them and they suddenly understand his language.
Right.
And I wonder if you could maybe, you may not be able to, but could you maybe elaborate on what makes Prince's sound during your era different from other sounds and what you had to undo for other artists? Or is that maybe too big a question?
No, I know what you're talking about. And here's what seems to be the case. Prince said something in the studio once, and because he said it, I believed it was true. Turns out it's not true. But
That's very Prince.
No, it was true for him. Yeah. It just wasn't true for other people. So what he said was that in theory, every instrument on a record should be capable of being the loudest thing in the mix. And I said, yeah, okay, gotcha. And for his way of listening to music, that was true. So he arranged music in such a way that I compare it to being a watchmaker. Every little part, meaning every instrumental tone, fits together in this symbiotic relationship whereby you can rotate your perspective on his records and focus on just the bass and get a treat. The treat is the term I use in the book to refer to listening pleasure. So you can listen to just the bass, you can listen to the drums, you can listen to the keyboards and the vocals and the guitars and the horns. Anywhere you choose to focus, from the local details to the global whole, you've got a record.
Right.
So when I left him and attempted to employ that philosophy with other people's arrangements, I realized the rest of the world doesn't make records like this.
Yeah.
They make the shape of their records are not so much like a watch, it's more like a pyramid or an upside down pyramid, where the weight, the musical weight, is either in the rhythm or it's in the melody and the lyrics. Sometimes it's shaped kind of like a square, or sort of an oval, where the weight's in the middle. But you learn in record making to distribute the musical weight so that the listener's spotlight of attention goes where you want it to go. You're guiding it to a specific aspect of the music that you want them to focus on. So when folks listen to Prince music, and sometimes maybe if they feel they don't get it, maybe they don't know what it is they're supposed to be listening to. In his world, you were supposed to be listening to all of it.
Absolutely. Agreed. Yeah.
Do you think that that's, I mean, think of it like that. it's more like a kind of how he ran the band and the way that because he was recording like the band in the studio, like in the warehouse and rehearsals, and a jam would just soon become a record, like many times. Do you think that kind of he learned that arrangement from playing live, or that way, or that was just his particular approach?
I think it was just his particular approach to music. I remember that Miles Davis said that he was our generation's Duke Ellington. And, he's comparing Prince to a band leader, not to Jimi Hendrix, not to James Brown, not to Sly. He compared him to Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
And Duke Ellington's great genius was to be a band leader and to recognize the links between composition and arrangement. And Miles, was certainly right about that. Prince was a band leader. And so he pulled the musicality and the musical gestures out of his musicians that served his musical vision, his sonic signature.
I like the analogy of the watch thing. I think with Prince fans and me personally, sometimes you want to deconstruct the watch and you want to see the bits inside. That's me as a fan. It's like you'll listen to it over and over again and you'll be like, oh right, and then you'd hear something you hadn't heard before. And I'm not saying Prince fans are more educated than any other fans, but I think that's the reason why we are Prince fans, because we like to deconstruct his music on many levels of technicality as well as spirituality as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I agree with you on that. Another way in which we can compare Prince to other musicians is to think about filmmaking. And there are some films that are real narrative. The story's got a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's got tension and release, and it's got the chase scenes and the exciting moments, and it's got the segue scenes and all that. And Prince approached sequencing albums very much like a filmmaker. But there are some filmmakers whose work is maybe a bit more abstract, or maybe it's a little more difficult to fully appreciate. Prince was certainly appreciated. I mean, the Purple Rain album was #1 for 24 weeks on the Billboard charts. But still, the true Prince fans who were there with him for album after album have an ear and an understanding of what it is that he does.
Yeah, this reminds me of, I need to run a personal theory by you and see whether you go, hey, yeah, or get out of town, because I think you're the boss on this. I've got this little theory that Prince music is head music disguised as foot music. So it's very neurotic and very codified with all these little bits of the watches and the springs, but it's given to us by and large in a 4/4 beat, in a James Brown kind of syncopated model, but actually it requires you to shut the hell up and go down and go and listen to it in your room like you're listening to Joni Mitchell or something.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's right. So I'm currently writing a textbook on music cognition for Princeton University Press, and the very first chapter is on the evolution of the music faculty, which they asked me to write a textbook, so I know some things about it. But of course, when you write a book, you have to do an awful lot of research and find the latest theories. And from Charles Darwin, who I'm firmly in the Darwin camp. He's the other Chuck D. He's my guy. From Charles Darwin to the modern theorists at the great universities of the world, a general consensus is that music evolved to express rhythm and melody. Everything else is gravy, the lyrics and the timbres and all that. Music boils down to rhythm and melody. And as it so happens, Prince was a genius with rhythm. No one programmed a drum machine like Prince. And he was a genius with melody. Pound for pound, he probably has, I don't know if any scholar has looked at this, but I think he's written more melodic hooks than any other single writer I can think of. Of course, you've got Lennon and McCartney, you've got Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, you have people working together, but one guy on his own, Prince was a genius with melody and rhythm, which, as you said, Andy, this allows you to get listening pleasure from more than one place. He's not all about the melody, he's not all about the lyrics, not all about the rhythm, but he could just slay you with one or more of those aspects on every song.
Absolutely.
So you talked earlier on about the getting together of an album and the way that Prince thinks of an album. I'm going to go to an earlier thing you said about the young people don't understand tape. Now, what are the challenges? Nowadays, you just create a playlist. If you want to work out how an album goes, you can just change the number on the top. You change its position in the playlist. What are the real challenges of getting together a playlist and an album compilation on tape and putting it together?
By playlist, do you mean a sequence?
Sorry, an album sequence. Sorry. Yeah, I'm working out an album sequence on tape.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite times with Prince. I loved that. So let me explain. The way most people do it is you go in the studio to make an album, and it would take about 3 months in those days, 80s, 90s, 3 months to get a whole album done. You knew which songs you were working on, which songs were going to be on the album, and at the end of the record, surprisingly to me, many artists don't care about the sequence at all. They'll let the producer do it, or they just won't spend a lot of time with it. Other artists, of course, are deeply involved. But one of the main differences with Prince is that his albums never had a start and an end date. He was constantly recording, constantly recording. He had a concept for what the next record would be, because the next record is going to involve a color scheme. It's going to involve clothing. It's going to involve, there's going to be a tour. You're going to be on the road for months supporting this album. So music would, the individual tracks would begin to be shaped with a concept of an album in mind. And once he finally figured out what the key songs on that album were going to be, like You Got the Look, for example, on Sign of the Times. Once he figured out what the key songs were, then he could start either going back into the vault and modifying some earlier pieces to fit, or he could go on a frenzy of writing to support the key, we'll call it the kernel, the core songs on an album. Anyway, once that painstaking work had finally reached an end and we finally knew which songs were going to constitute an album, this is the great moment. I mean, this is when a director sees the movie for the first time and actually knows what it is. So now all we have to do is we have to sequence that album, and this was so much fun, especially for me because Prince didn't want to use razor blades and cut the tape. So I got to be specifically more involved. So what we would do, he would always know, because he would usually do an intro to an album, he'd always know what the first track was going to be. So what you do is you put up the stereo mix of the first track and you play it, and I would stand next to the tape machine with a grease pencil, standing next to the tape head, and he would be tapping his foot because he'd be counting down the tempo. 2, 3, 4, and maybe you want to wait a little bit, but usually when you come in with the next song, it's going to be a little faster. So 2, 3, 4, he would nod his head and I would mark the tape. And then I'd have to take the next song and cue it up and splice it with the razor blade and the splicing tape and put it right there, right where he'd made the mark. And then we listen back, you roll back, and you're listening to how the keys go together. You're listening to how the energy level flows. You're making a sequence, right? Just like cutting together a movie. When do we change to the next scene? So you listen. Now, if the two songs went together well, but maybe the tempos didn't match up, or the keys needed something in between for a better segue, we would take those two things apart, and then this was so much fun. We would either do a crossfade where you play the tail of the first one, and on another machine, the head of the second one, and you crossfade them gently into each other like a DJ would do. Or if something more drastic was needed, he'd do a little intervening part.
Wow.
We'd quickly grab some instruments and record a little intervening part that could be cut in between to segue those things one to the other. And you repeat that. So fun. You repeat that with the remaining songs until you have a side of vinyl. And a side of vinyl could be no more than 17 minutes long. So if you had the sequence you wanted, but you're up at 20 minutes, then you have to start deciding what to cut. So then you have to go into the bodies of these songs and you have to cut them and remove 8 bars of a solo, remove 8 bars of an outro, remove a whole outro chorus. So now you're editing the individual songs, but now you're down to 17 minutes. Okay, you're good. Now you repeat that with side B with a different set of songs. Then you finally get to sit and listen to your album,
But
start to finish.
it was fantastic. You would see him come up with like little embroidery to put in between tracks as in like on the fly, as it were.
That's what we did.
So fantastic.
Yeah. And we had fun. The crossfades were really fun too. It's a little bit of a technical challenge, which I always enjoyed because that let me do the thing that I do well. So it was always fun to bring one tape machine up, and you got to get the levels perfect, because God help you if you splice it in and there's a level mismatch. But I'm an audio technician, so I know my stuff. That's easy for me. I get the A machine, the B machine, the C machine is the crossfade, the destination machine, and then you cut those pieces in. Really fun.
This is just goosebumpy hearing about this. It's amazing.
Was he quite decisive when he was sequencing, or did he sort of procrastinate for a long time? Because those albums all felt as if they were quite thematic and there was a theme and an overall vibe. But in the process of starting, I guess with Prince, the creation of music is just a constant stream because he was creating so long. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg question, because I don't know, would he know a concept at the beginning, or would he discover the concept, and would that speak to how he would sequence, and would it enable him to be decisive, or would it mean that he'd have to think about it even more? How did he approach that?
No, the sequence, he was very, very decisive. He was nothing if not decisive, almost to a fault. He, once he had the concept, each album was like a movie to him. So the lyrical message, and I have argued, and I think I'm right about this, but I could be persuaded otherwise, but I've argued that the pieces of music that went into the vault didn't go into the vault because they were lesser pieces of music. It's because lyrically they didn't fit the theme on the album. So it was definitely a lyrical theme that needed to run from tip to tail. So he had the concept. He was pretty decisive. The things that would change that concept would be if better songs came along. If all of a sudden he's had a spark of inspiration and now he's got a new song and this must fit on the album, I'll change the concept in order to get this one on the album. Or in the case of Early Sign of the Times, originally that was going to be Dream Factory, and he was engaged to Susanna Melvoin, and he had the Revolution as his band. And when he realized these guys aren't going to be around for the end of this album, that things were falling apart, certain pieces of music came off, and then he continued writing so that the concept could be changed to accommodate Sheila and her band. Sheila and her band are great musicians, but they had different strengths and weaknesses than the Revolution. So that meant that the things he could do on stage, on tour, would be different. He had Miko Weaver, not Wendy Melvoin, both equally great, but different rhythm guitar players. Sheila on drums, not Bobby Z. So now things need to change. And this is why sometimes his concept of an album would evolve until it was finally set. And he realized, this is what the album is. I can give you an example on Sign of the Times where this was so much fun. It was going to be a double album. And he realized he needed a ballad. And he was exhausted. He wanted to get this record done. He needed a ballad. Rather than write one, he had me pull Slow Love out of the vault. I think he had written it with a woman when he was a girl. They were young, in high school, and they pulled that out, old tape, pulled it out of the vault, and we just mixed it really quickly, really quickly. It was Prince, myself, and the assistant engineer, Coke Johnson. We had all three of us had our hands on faders as we were printing the mix. And so at certain points, he was directing us like an orchestra conductor. You, with your fingers on these faders, swell this up. You pull this down, mute this here, unmute it there. And collectively, the three of us, no automation, we just mixed it. And if anyone made a mistake, they'd say, stop, I missed the cue, roll back. And we'd either start again or we'd just splice it in.
Wow.
Yeah, so Slow Love went on really fast because he needed a song that was a ballad in a certain key at a certain tempo to fit in this sequence.
As we are touching on Sign of the Times here, so it bleeds into one of my questions a little bit. When the Super Deluxe edition came out, what was your involvement in that, and what was your thought process and what specific things did you do to help that come to fruition?
I was not involved in deciding what's going to be released, but at that time, the person who was in charge of that is the finest record executive I've ever worked with, a fellow named Michael Howe, and he was working with the estate. He had been at Warner Brothers a long time as a senior VP. So I didn't work with him directly, but Michael contacted me. We had many conversations about what else was Prince recording right around that time. So Michael combed the vault to the best of his ability. It's still kind of a mess there, but he pulled up tracks from that era, and they invited me to write a piece. They invited me and many others to write pieces for the booklet. So that was really my only involvement.
Oh, okay.
However, kind of vainly, when it came out, they sent me the big set on vinyl. So I went through and I counted each title, and I realized that I had recorded all but 4 of them.
Oh my goodness,
Oh, wow.
I would have been vain too. I mean,
It made me proud.
I think that's just pride, isn't it? That's the good
It
kind.
was pride.
It's well earned pride, though.
Yeah.
You are so allowed a little bit of vanity for that. That is not a problem at all. Yeah.
We keep making Prince puns. I mean, we got love and pride from Chopin. Do you have vanity? Thanks, Paddy. I have a question that kind of pertains to everything you're saying. Is just shocking me with the kind of, you're bringing us right into the studio almost, and I'm feeling it all over again. And just you talking about slow love on the fly is spine tingly to me. And you know, as a fan of music, when you hear something new that shocks you, gives you the treats you talk about in your book, and you have, I can't remember who it was, maybe Tori Amos or something, saying she heard Kate Bush, Hounds of Love, and just had to pull over to the side of the road or something, you know. And I remember hearing Prince, really hearing him, and hearing things that were so shocking and weird and wrong in the right ways to me. And that's what I love about Prince's music. Wrong in the right ways, inventively different, sick, as he called it, I think, sometimes. Now, as a fan, the first time you hear something like that, it's amazing. Now, you're way closer to that. Is there, like, one thing, if you could go back and be present again, hearing a Prince song at the moment of creation again and being startled by it, which Prince song would you pick to be knocked out by again?
Oh, la la. Well, the 2 of them come to mind. One of the ones I did with him fairly early in my time with him was Condition of the Heart on the Around the World in a Day album. And that was, that you know, when that came together, I joined him as a Prince fan. I had seen him on the Dirty Mind tour. I'd seen him on the 1999 tour. I had all his albums. I was a fan, and I knew he was great. But Condition of the Heart wiped me out. That was a very exciting moment. And the other one, God, still to this day, mind-blowing, is Joy and Repetition.
Oh,
Yeah.
Love
And
it.
that guitar solo, and then, as if that solo's not great enough, that scream at the end where he sings "There's Joy in Repetition" and hits the note that he sustains on the guitar, you just think, this man is not from planet Earth. And here's what's so poignant about it. We're in Minnesota. And I came up through Los Angeles and that whole LA music scene. Prior to Prince, I had worked for Crosby, Stills and Nash, and I knew the whole LA rock scene and a lot of those people there and how records were made and all that. And I knew, especially from David Crosby, but I knew how Prince was regarded by the LA rock scene around that time. And I knew the Jacksons. I worked with them after Prince, had met Michael a couple of times. I knew where he came up from and all the support he had to reach the top of the charts. And the thing that was so poignant to me with Prince is it's a guy doing this amazing stuff with just an audio technician sitting next to him.
Oh, boy.
Well, they've got the best. They've got these high budgets, the best studio musicians in the world. They've got all this training and support in this network. And here's this guy from North Minneapolis saying, I'll take you on. And it just my heart swells with feeling for him when I think of the courage it took and the skill and the brains to compete head to head with them with so fewer resources. And yet, and I learned this with other artists subsequently, at the end of the day, the musical ideas win. At the end of the day, the music wins.
Amazing. So could I just ask you a little more about that? He comes in one day, one night, and you don't know what's happening next, and he just joy and repetitions all over the place.
Right. His favorite way to work, was to work without talking. Now he loved working with the band, and I think that might have actually been his favorite way to work, is when there's people there and it's kind of social, and he's got his band and they're coming up with parts. Because I know what makes him happy is, if he's laughing and making jokes, if he's happy, we're going to get stuff done. But having the band there was also a slower process because there were more minds that were doing some trial and error. But when you're working alone, when he's working alone, and there's only an engineer in the room, what he prefers is that all the instruments be set up and routed and getting to the tape machine, coming from the tape machine, ready to go, so that he can move silently from instrument to instrument to instrument without having to communicate with you. And that meant his drum kit needed to be tuned, his guitars and bass needed to be tuned, the keyboards, the amps all plugged in and warmed up and mic'd. And so what he would do is either call me at home and tell me what he wanted, or more often he'd just tell me to come to the studio in very few words, and I would find a note written on the console. He'd tell me what instrumentation he wanted set up, and I have one that I kept because it was kind of sweet. We were doing a piano ballad, and he wrote all these instructions, and then down at the bottom he said, "The faster you work, the more I can get done." And then he wrote, "Save my blood pressure, please." Blood pressure. You're 26 years old. You don't have blood pressure. Yeah, but if I could do that, if I have everything set up and he doesn't have to talk, he's happy.
Wow.
I just have to kind of mention on Joy and Repetition, there is something about that song that it feels like it doesn't feel like it's tracked. It's, that it feels like that one person created all of the things at the same time. There's a way that the clean guitar at the end talks to the dirty guitar, and they have a conversation, and there's just something special about that particular track. I mean, and that's a high order in Prince world. But so to see something like that, or something as epic as Crystal Ball, go into the vault and then to resurface again, I mean, what's it like to see that tape just go, oh, well, this doesn't fit this concept?
Yeah, that one killed me. That one just killed me because I just loved it so much. There were others. I loved Splash. I really loved Splash, and that didn't make it on. And there are just so many others that I just thought were great, and it was always hard to see them go into the vault.
I mean, Movie Star, wow.
Yeah.
I loved Movie Star.
And Moonbeam Levels.
Wow.
Oh,
From
yes.
the time I first heard it, as a Prince fan, I'm over the moon for it. And we did put it into the sequence of Purple Rain. It was on Purple Rain, and we pulled it off. He put it into the sequence of Parade, Under the Cherry Moon, and for that movie, pulled it off. And that was heartbreaking to see that come off every time. And I believe we probably even put it into The Sign of the Times, or might have been Dream Factory or Crystal Ball at one time. He kept pulling it off. And clearly it was for the lyrical message.
It's so amazing that like some of the songs you're mentioning as favourites that didn't get put out on the immediate project or whatever. And, they're instant, like, different coloured candies, different flavours, different pearls, just really different. Like, Splash is so different from Joy Repetition, right? And these are this guy's throwaways. I mean, I've thought this, obviously, like we all have for years. They're better than other people's entire careers, the stuff he threw away sometimes.
There was another, Sexual Suicide. You remember Sexual Suicide? Yeah. With those horns. I loved that.
I love that song. It sounds like nothing else.
Because when that, like Sexual Suicide and a lot of stuff that you worked on came out in like 97, 96, 97 on the Crystal Ball, were you contacted before that, or did it just come up?
No, I wasn't at that time because, of course, he was alive and making his own decisions, and it had nothing to do with me. Sometimes people will ask me questions about Prince's catalog after my time with him, and I have some of the recordings he made, several, quite a lot of the recordings he made after my time with him, but I'm not as familiar with those things because, of course, listening to those records evoked an awful lot of memories. And since working with him, it was impossible to listen to him without recalling other music, and a lot of times I could no longer listen as a Prince fan, although I loved musicology and I loved Alphabet Street and much of the work that he did, the Batman album, things like that. But it became difficult sometimes because it was just so entwined with memories.
I think to kind of jump half a step from that, I think that apart from me, we haven't had a personal relationship with Prince, but I often think that like one of the many ingredients in his music that keeps it so relevant and so universal is there's a lot of pain in Prince's mix, right? And it's like, quite apart from having personal memories, it's so like, again, Joy and Repetition is so painful, and it's got joy in the title, and this is a perfect Prince song.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I might be too much.
No. I'm trying to think of the best way to say what I'm feeling right now. It is well known that Prince had a rough childhood. And the other thing that gets me about him, and students were asking about this week in Spain, they were asking, bless their hearts, they were asking about fame and what it's like when you become famous. And they asked a lot of questions about that. And I talked about what I had observed and the folks who do it well. And as an example of someone who was truly harmed by it, I cited Amy Winehouse. And I talked about how initially, when you first get famous, people, artists, musicians have a tendency to just be truthful. And you think, well, just tell them the truth. Just tell them the truth and they'll go away and leave me alone. I've told them the truth. That's all they need to know. But what happens is the more truth you reveal, the more likely interviewers are going to want to go deeper and deeper and deeper into your psyche, and they're going to touch that place in your psyche that you use to create music. And I can see it. I can see it in Amy Winehouse's early interviews. Like, she's just doing what most beginning artists do. She's just telling the truth. And that doesn't work. It doesn't work, not over the long haul. Prince had the good intuition pretty early on to not reveal who he was and to put this psychic barrier between himself and the public and others and interviewers so that he could preserve the place from which he makes music. So yeah, back to the question you were raising about the pain. What that does is it socially isolates you. And it also means that the people who love you the most don't really know you. And we know from the neurobiology of creativity that hyper-creative people are isolated because they're odd ducks. They're hard. They don't. It's hard for them to find other people to relate to. So never was a man more alone.
Yeah.
Than that guy at certain periods in his life, because there was no one who could really, really understand him, and he had to make that devil's bargain in order to have a long career.
Well, that almost preempts something I wanted to ask you as well. Then I'll shut up and let the other guys say something. But I was thinking, I've heard you talk before. Prince had a genius for melody. Prince had a genius for this, and I agree. And I assume you would call him a genius per se, right?
I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think so. But I think he's in a very rare category, clearly. Like, for instance, I don't think Paul McCartney is a genius in the same of the same kind of stripe as someone like Prince, who, Prince had all those kind of signs. He didn't sleep. He was so committed. He lived this kind of 360 life. And I guess my question is, do you think there's something, well, it's twofold. Do you think there's something that separates people like Prince even from, most of the good and the great? And the other question is, I think I know what the answer is going to be, but if you could have something like Prince's gift bestowed on you magically, would you want that, or would you just run from that in horror?
Well, to the second question, no, I don't want that.
I thought I did when I was a kid, but it feels so scary now.
Yeah. Interesting that you bring up Paul McCartney. What a genius for melody. What a songwriter. How many songwriters alive have given us that many classic songs? Paul is the man. Now we know. I'm sorry, but I want to answer the question, but I'm going to have to go into some brain science.
Right.
Music is processed for nearly all of us, melody, pitches, things like that, in the right hemisphere, and then speech in the left hemisphere. Except for folks who have perfect pitch, and then there's some different wiring going on there. Without a doubt, Sir Paul McCartney has an extraordinary processing engine in the right frontal lobe and the right temporal lobe, and of course memory circuits and things like that, and being in touch with the dopaminergic reward system. All of these things allow him to create these incredible melodies. Now, Prince had a good deal of that going on as well. But what Prince had, and we know this, we know that he had epileptic seizures as a child. That involves the medial temporal lobe, primarily on the left-hand side, which is similar to where language is processed. So there was some unusual neural connectivity in addition to the stuff that we would point to as being evidence of great musicianship. So Prince had the great musicianship plus some extra stuff going on that fired him on many more cylinders than some others and contributed to that profile. Now, there's another thing that is a network called the default network, which is it's our sense of self, it's our psyche, and it's where we go into, it's the place we activate when we go into our own heads. It's the circuitry that is the precursor of being creative. So you have to go into your own head, and what you have to do, not only do you have to go into your own head, but you have to cut off certain executive thinking here in the frontal lobe. You have to have, like freestyle rappers do, you have to have reduced inhibition. Jazz musicians have this too when they're improvising. You have to let yourself go and release the brakes on many circuits that allow you to just live a quotidian life in society. People who are highly creative, jazz musicians, freestyle rappers, someone like Prince, and certainly Paul McCartney, can go there, and they can go there really quickly, really automatically, and cut themselves off from the sort of thinking that most of us do day to day. So that's a dangerous place. And you think of Brian Wilson, and you think of the Beach Boys. You think of others who were clearly brilliant and perhaps troubled as well. The ones who are brilliant and not troubled, I'm thinking of David Byrne here, who I worked with on an album. Folks like that, they really are exceptional. Elvis Costello, I'll put him in that group too.
Did you ever see Prince put the brakes on, as in sit at the desk, sit at an instrument, and have no ideas? Or was it always, if he wasn't inspired, he had enough skills to just play until an idea came?
That's a good question. So my friend, the sculptor Tim Bruckner, says he says craft is what sustains you when art fails you, which it will 90% of the time. So most of the time the muse does not strike. Art, original thought is not there. So writers like Ernest Hemingway and people like Prince and many, many others just practice their craft until the muse does strike and they do get an idea. So this was fun too, because Prince, if he was awake, he wanted to have a musical instrument in his hands. He wanted to be playing music. And if he was playing music, he wanted to be recording it. And it didn't matter if we were on a movie set, if we were on tour, it didn't matter where we were, he wanted to be recording. So if he didn't have any particular inspiration or idea, well, the man would just get the drum machine and get a riff going, either get a riff going on guitar, or just get a groove going, and you could kind of tell. You could tell. And often, if he had a song, it would be something that we had done at rehearsal or something that he came to the studio with. He'd have the lyrics already written. But for his dance stuff, often he just got a groove going, and he'd take the bass, he'd take a keyboard part, he'd fool around with the key and things like that. And then when we had a rhythm track, he'd take a cassette of it. He liked to write in the car. He liked sitting in his car. So he'd go sit in the car with a cassette and his notebook and just play the cassette and write his lyrics. I'd have the vocal mic all ready to go when he came back in. Then he'd lay down the vocal. Now he knows what the song is. Then he would arrange it and add the other parts. And then we'd have a track.
That's how you do it then. Okay.
It sounds just like going to work, at the typing pool. And I just went to work, and I worked and had lunch at 1. And
it's fantastic. It's just honestly, we're all seeing it in our heads, I think, at the moment.
Listening to you talk and a few of the things you said, particularly going back to the idea of the Jacksons having a framework around them that they're brilliant, but they have a framework around them, whereas Prince is sat in a studio with yourself coming up with epic moment after epic moment. It just struck me because I'm kind of, don't want to go too deep here, but I'm kind of not a religious person, but if anything could make me believe that there was something spiritual truly going on, and I know kind of Prince was obviously that way inclined, it is the fact you've sort of given it a measurement in a way, because here was this guy sat with you doing all this without those frameworks and everything. And it's funny, I've never really thought of it that way. So thank you for that, because that rather landed, particularly as we went along. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the thing that gets me. Now, I was some years ago, after his passing, I was talking in Lexington, Kentucky, to a group of Prince fans. I was invited to come out and talk, and might have been 100 people in the room. And they wanted me on stage for 4 hours, and they hired me just to tell Prince stories, which I was happy to do. So I was talking, and there was a woman standing not far from the stage, and she kind of waved her hand like this, and she said, "Stop, stop, stop." And I said, "What's going on?" She said, "You're making him human." And I asked, "Why is that a problem?" I was curious, why is this bothering you? And she said, he's just superhuman to me. I don't want to hear that he was human. And it caught me by surprise, but I said to her, "Isn't he even more amazing when you realize he was just a guy?" I don't mean just a guy, but I mean he was a mere human. He wasn't from another planet. He was a child. He was a boy who went to school. I remember his mom came to the house one day because she was moving. She had a cardboard box of his stuff. He and his mom didn't get along. She had this cardboard box. It was not a sealed box. It was open. And she said, here's your stuff. I'm moving, and so I thought you might want to have it. And we were at his home studio, and he just said, "I'm working now. Set it on the floor, and I'll deal with it later." And so she left, and he caught me giving it the side eye, and he said, "You can look at it if you want." When I think about that now, I wondered, why did he tell me I could look at it? I think maybe he wanted to be known. And I went over to the box while he was doing his vocals, and I combed through it, and I saw a report card. Well, for one thing, I saw his birth certificate. He was born Prince Rogers Nelson. For anyone who thinks he named himself Prince, they could shove it. His name is Prince Rogers Nelson. Anyway, I saw his report card, and he was a kid. He was maybe 10 years old, maybe, 9 or 10 years old, and he was a top student. And it said, the teacher wrote at the bottom, "Prince is very bright, and he's a little bit shy. He's very reserved, but he's very respectful and very respectful of authority. He's an obedient kid." that's the man I knew. The boy became that man. He was. Oh, and Susan Moonsey, of course, told me so many of those early stories. Bobby Z talked about what they were like in high school. Morris Day, Andre Simone talked about Prince when he was 14 years old. This was a kid who had a rough childhood and overcame it.
I was going to say, like, recently they found that footage of him at the teacher strike when he was a little kid. What was it like to kind of, I mean, you've had this evidence of who he was as a child before any of us from looking at that stuff. What's it like to kind of match that footage to, to the person you knew and to those artifacts, those bits of his life?
I'm so glad you asked that question because there was consistency. He was recognizable. When I first met him and started working with him, it felt inside as though we were both teenagers in high school. It felt like we were both 15. And I kind of felt like this is a kid I would have been friends with in high school. Prince was kicked out of his home when he was 14 years old. He reported in some interview the last time he cried was on the phone with his dad, begging his dad to take him in, and Dad said no, and he had nowhere to go, and Andre Simone took him in. That was his trauma at age 14. My trauma at age 14 was that my mother died after a very long illness. And I was the oldest in my family. I was the only girl. I have all brothers. And you're never the same. Trauma at age 14, it's going to affect you. So he and I had a little bit of something in common. My life was rough after the passing of my mother. It was rough. And his life was rough in his teenage years. And there was a thing, we were both members of a certain club. There was a thing that we recognized at some level on each other. He hadn't had it easy, and in a different way, I hadn't had it all that easy either. And I think in that way, it allowed us to see the core of each other's teenage self. We knew it. And we also had what we had in common is a certain kind of frozen adolescence. Some part of you is never going to get to mature in the normal way because its maturation was disrupted. Mm-hmm. So I think, I don't even remember where we started this conversation, but yeah, when I saw him on that little clip when he was 11 years old, it was not incongruous with the man that I knew. He's the same guy.
Having visited Minneapolis and, we went to the celebration, me and Chopin here and a few others some years ago. One of the actual great kind of grounding things of hanging out in Minneapolis, well, especially during that week, a whole Prince week, was the contextualizing of somebody as a horizontal person in their environment rather than this vertical kind of monolith that you've made them into. And I just found that really kind of so softening, and I don't know, somehow it just really spoke to me. And I had a similar thing. I bring up the Beatles a lot today, but they're just in the mesh of everything. But going to Liverpool, and you kind of walk around Liverpool. I don't know if you've been, Susan, and you've been, and I think you can kind of, you get context from everything, and you go, oh, this is why the music sounds like it does, because this, because that, because of the feel of a place. And you realize that it's a two-way street, I think, between an individual and their upbringing.
Very true. You can't separate an artist from their influences. As we would say in the music business, everything influences you. There was a good reason why Prince didn't want to live in New York or Los Angeles after he got famous. I know he lived elsewhere for brief periods, but he always came home to Minneapolis. And that's in part because the Midwest is different from the coastal cities. And Minneapolis inspired him. He liked living there. He liked coming from that place, which is quite different, as you no doubt noticed, from New York and LA and Nashville. It's quite different.
I've been very lucky. I've been New York, Atlanta, LA, Texas, and the best place was when I went to Minneapolis and Minnesota and being around that environment. And I have a lot of spiritual connections and still a lot of interest with like Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, and Janet Jackson and Rhythm Nation, and I'm hopefully going to go back in the next few years because I felt Minneapolis was so special.
Yes, I remember a record executive saying something I've never forgotten. He said of Minnesota, he said that they are personally conservative and politically liberal.
Yeah.
And he said their motto is in a Minnesotan accent, "Oh, I would never do that, but you go right ahead." And this is the kind of place that can give us a Bob Dylan and a Prince because they're open-minded, but personally conservative. And these were values that mattered to Prince. He was respectful of authority. He wasn't to throw a television out the hotel window onto the sidewalk kind of guy. He wasn't involved in bacchanalia or anything like that. He was personally conservative. But had liberal attitudes.
But I mean, who's got time to throw a TV out the window when you need to get to a guitar and make joy in repetition? I know which one I'd rather do.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
One of the things I wanted to ask, if I could then, when you said that somebody said to you, "Oh, you're making him too human," somebody like you who was so close is, and I'm sure everybody said this to you, it's so special because you were so close and an intrinsic part of what went on over those years, over that sort of soundtrack of that era. Since his passing, because you're very generous with what you're prepared to say and how you approach it, and it obviously gives you a lot of joy. We can see it when you're talking about things and stuff like that. Was it something that you consciously decided you wanted to do? Or did it kind of come to you with people asking? And I suppose, what do you get from it? Like, is it a little bit of a catharsis? Is it just the joy of continuing a legacy? What kind of complexities and things are going on there?
Great question. Right after he passed away, I think it was within 24 hours, I was on a conference call with the Revolution, and Gilbert Davison was on that call, Alan Leeds, those of us who worked with him in the 80s. There might have been 10 of us on a conference call, and we were asking ourselves and each other, what do we do? What do we do? What do we say? Many folks were being approached quite naturally to be interviewed, and Wendy and Lisa didn't want to. Sheila didn't want to. Not at that time. It was just too raw. I mean, a day had passed. Just prior to that conference call, I had called my mentor, my production mentor, Tony Berg, out in Los Angeles. Tony's a Hollywood kid. He's not a kid, but he grew up in a show business family. And he's an intellect, and he's an art lover. I admire him greatly. And I called Tony and I said, if I'm asked to be interviewed, what do I do? And Tony said, don't canonize him. Just tell the truth. Don't make him into a saint. Just tell the truth. And so when we had that conference call, no one wanted to take interviews. I said, I'll do it because I'm a scientist, and scientists worship the truth. That's our spirituality.
Wow.
Just let me tell you the truth. So I say yes to these interviews for a number of reasons. One is to share the truth of what I saw and experienced. And I'm usually careful to say I was with him for 4 years he had a long life. I only saw this segment. And the part that I saw was his music making part. I don't know what his girlfriends know about him, what his family knows, what his guy friends know, what his photographer and his makeup artist know. I know what I know from his music making as an engineer. So trust me, my perspective is very limited. But of that, being a Prince fan myself, I know what it feels like. I love Andrew Hickey's podcast. Have you listened to A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs?
I don't know.
It's the greatest thing of all things.
Wow.
Okay.
Andrew Hickey is from Manchester, and he has this podcast, and it's like taking a music history class from the greatest teacher you've ever had in your life. So just Google the numbers 500 songs, 500songs.com, and listen to Andrew Hickey. He's the greatest of the great. Anyway, Andrew Hickey says, and I'm going to wrap up my answer to your question, but Andrew Hickey says, if I've done my job right, you will be able to imagine this record at the time and place in which it was released. You mentioned Liverpool earlier. Here's what conditions were like in 1962 in Liverpool. So here's why this record had such a big impact. Or Hawthorne, California, when the Beach Boys came out with something. Here's what else was on the radio. Here's what was going on. I want, because I loved and admired and respected Prince, I want to take listeners into that studio in the 1980s, see what I saw, feel what I felt, experience what I experienced to the best of my ability for the historical record. And that's the best I can do. I think he deserves it. We're not talking about a person who was a bad person, whose public image needs to be revisited. Find out who the true guy was. You know the sorts of people I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This was a good man. At least what I saw. He's not a saint. Other people had some trouble with him here and there. I never did. And I'm going to tell my story for that reason, because I think he deserves it. I think music history deserves it.
Thank you.
100%.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you for it. The minute you said taking you into the studio, it fired off I mean, sorry,
never gonna let you
part
go,
of my
isn't
brain
it?
is going, thank you so much for that, and thank you for your time, and but the other part of me is like, because as a musician and somebody who does, and I used to work on tape, like I started with cassette to cassette, so tape hiss was part of my early recording life. The one thing I want to know about at the time when Claire Fisher brings his strings in, I want to know, like, how do you combine those tapes? What does he deliver those string parts on? Is it a separate 24 track tape? What's the process of
Good question. Yeah, it makes me cringe to think of that today, because tape is like hard drives, malleable and vulnerable. But it was rare to have two multi-track tapes, and you didn't want to go a generation down. So you took the master 24-track tape to Claire in the studio. Prince gave him, a cassette of the song or something like that to, it would have been a cassette, to write a string arrangement for. And then you bring the multi-track on the day of the session to the studio and put it up, and Claire records the strings. You can only remember 24-track tape. For the youth of today who might be listening, 24 tracks was it. So those string arrangements needed to go on a stereo pair of tracks, and that's that, which means your mic choice and mic placement, the blend, everything must be perfect, because you don't get that back. You don't get the individual instruments. So anyway, yeah, Claire, brother, you got 2 tracks.
Well, you know what? You did a pretty darn good job with them.
Yeah.
That is blowing my mind, because I thought for sure with some of the little tasteful little bits and kind of horns and stuff, it feels like he's had time to isolate the tracks, but those were actually, they were presented as just those on the stereo tracks that were given.
Yeah. So it's recorded. Claire had his own engineer who was his regular person. And I'd come to the studio, and sometimes I'd come at the tail end of sessions and see them, but I'd be working with Prince in another studio, and then I'd be dispatched, to go to the studio and get the multi-track tape, bring it back to Prince, and this was so much fun. You get the tape. And Prince didn't want to, I think this story is well known, he didn't want to meet Claire face to face. So I'd get the tape, and I'd bring it back to our studio. We'd put up the tape, push up those faders, and there you go. There's your string arrangement.
I love Claire Fisher's contribution. I think it's just amazing. Can I ask you one last question on just talking to that, Susan? Which is like one last one. Given all the restrictions of the good old bad old days, or the bad old good old days, and now we can do quote unquote anything in the box, Do you think, does the ingenuity just move elsewhere, or do you think it's more exciting to work with those restrictions, or is that just always the perennial question?
The constraints are a good thing for creativity. If you're making a film, you're constrained the minute you choose your actors, because they're only going to have certain gestures and certain range. Constraints are good for you. I don't know how the kids today do it with hundreds of tracks. It sounds awful.
Yeah, I guess that's my question. Do we have too few constraints now, too many options and too much dissipation?
I would find it really intimidating. And I would also find it really frustrating. So in the days of analog tape, when you only had 24 tracks, the engineer had to be an artist, because well, today, for example, a student played his Pro Tools session. He had 4 tracks for kick drum because he chose 4 different mics to put on the kick drum. And he still hadn't decided which mics or which combination of them he was going to use in the final mix. How do you do that? I don't know. In the analog days, the engineer, when recording something, had to decide the blend of your microphones, because you have 1 track for kick drum, you have 1 track for snare. Usually you would put a mic on the top and then you put another mic at the bottom of the snare. And now today they put those on separate tracks. But in my day, the engineer decided, and that's the commitment. Having those constraints gave parameters for your creativity, and I personally found it. I mean, that was our craft in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, is working within those parameters. We also had a bit of a mandate to capture reality. I wrote about that in the book. Realism, because if you were a great engineer, you captured what the room sounded like when the musicians were in there, which fostered realistic daydreaming and imagery from the listener. But today, there's no there because there's no room. And oftentimes, listen to Old Town Road by Lil Nas X, and his vocal, there was a mic on his vocal, but the banjo is a sample, and everything else just came out of the box. It's quite different.
Just so that it doesn't sound like I'm dragging everything back to the good old days, what was the last record that knocked you out, Susan?
Oh my goodness. Just recently, Tyler, the Creator's new album, Chroma Capilla. I don't remember. It's probably left off a consonant there. Yeah, really creative, really creative. I really like Tyler, the Creator. And I love, I mean, that's not, musically, it's not my favorite thing, but boy, do I love listening to his creativity and how he deconstructs music and puts it back together. I love the way he thinks as an artist. I really like that. The new Billie Eilish record, again, not on the street where I live, but I admire her so greatly as an artist. She's the real deal. And I like that one a lot. Now, he's a controversial guy. Some people, musicians, love him or hate him, but I'm a fan of Father John Misty. Josh Tillman. I love Father John Misty. And I read some reviewer said, oh, he's for college boys. Well, I must be a college boy because I really like Father John Misty. And those 3 records most recently have knocked me out.
Well, that's nice that you live on a lot of different streets then, right?
Oh, no. I was born and raised on Soul Street, and then that's the street. That's my permanent address. I take a holiday.
Take a stroll. I got it.
And I visit these other streets, and I think, oh, that's nice. And I buy the T-shirt, and I take a picture, and I talk to people about it. So I live on a street I've always lived on.
Okay, that's terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Earlier you were talking about miking drums, and one of the things that really, knowing the way that Prince recorded that in the warehouses, recording a drum set in a warehouse and making it sound good, what were the challenges with that?
Here's one thing we know. Here's several things we know, and certainly I learned it from Prince. No one ever walked into a record shop looking to purchase sounds. They walk into a record shop to purchase music. And there are all kinds of videos and textbooks that will teach you how to mic a drum kit. But it doesn't matter, because what you're miking is not the instrument. You're miking the music. You're going to choose the mics and you're going to place the mics such that You're capturing the performance, the music that is being made. There is no one perfect mic for a snare or a kick drum or overheads. So I learned from Prince, one, that it doesn't matter because the music is, if the music is good, it's going to sound as if it's good. My records from that era don't sound good compared to the George Massenbergs of the world and Al Schmitz and the great engineers. No, mine can't hold up. But musically, they're so exciting.
Mhm.
That, yeah, we let it go. My old colleague Greg Kirsten, works with Adele, he co-recorded and not co-recorded. I meant to say he co-wrote and arranged and produced, and now he mixes the Adele records, many of them. He did Hello and he did Easy on Me. Easy on Me sounds so bad that I was playing it for students in the control room today at Berkeley, and I had to stop it. It was agonizing. It sounds so bad. It was a huge hit record. So it didn't sound bad on purpose. The choices Greg made, I'm sure, were made to sell a vocal. This is the reason that I played Ella Fitzgerald doing Azure Mood, and recorded in 1947, I think. And the student said, "Is there something wrong with it?" So back to the answer to your question. You can mic drums any number of ways, but it's going to change depending on who's playing the drums, and it's going to change depending on your sonic signature, meaning your idea of what good is. I'll tell you briefly a story that happened to me a year ago, January. I hadn't been in the studio in decades or a decade, and I decided I wanted to live a bucket list item, and I wanted to go to Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, because I've been fantasizing about it since I was 9 years old. I had to go to Fame at least once and record something there. So I called up good buddy Jeff Black. He's a songwriter in Nashville. I said, "Jeff, let's go." And we brought some former students and a new friend, songwriter Brad Chrysler, and we went down to Fame in Alabama. Now, it was January, and it turned out on the day we arrived, there was a freakish ice storm. And the boys, Jeremy and Josh, couldn't get to the studio on time. They're stuck in the snow up in Nashville. That's okay, I can go ahead and get started. And I asked the engineer, Spencer, for my usual list of microphones, nothing fancy. They didn't have any of that. They just had a few. So I didn't have my microphones that I normally use. And the mic he gave me, he says, "This is what we use on the kick drum. It's a mic I hate. It's a D112. I've never gotten a good sound out of it. I hate this thing, but I have no choice." So I put it on the kick drum and pushed the faders up in the control room. And it sounded good, actually. It sounded quite good. I liked it. I was happy with it. Made some changes and EQ'd it, and everything's good. And finally, Jeremy and Josh arrives, and Jeremy sets up his guitar rig right next to the drums. Jeremy is a former student, and I love him so. And I'm moving something around, and Jeremy says, "Susan, if I tell you something, do you promise you won't hate me?" And I said, "Yes, I promise." He said, "The mic on the kick is backwards." And it was so funny, and I laughed so hard. And our guy, Spencer from Fame, Spencer said, "I'm thinking this woman is a genius." I said, "No, this woman is an idiot. I didn't know what the front of the mic was." But I was happy with the sound. And if I'd been unhappy with it, I just would have moved it around until I was happy. So it really doesn't matter. Those rules don't matter that much. You put your microphones on the music, you capture the music, the performances, and you're there. You're done.
Fantastic.
I'm guessing when you're recording the music of someone like Prince and the people that were in his circle, you can put any kind of mic at that.
Yes,
Something's
that's
going to
it.
come out.
Yeah, that's it. And we had the stage mics because it was rehearsal, so you couldn't have anything delicate or fancy. We just had the dynamic stage mics. But for me, that works. Prince was happy with it. He used a very expensive microphone, a Tube U47 for his vocals when we were in the studio. But when we were at rehearsal, just a cheap stage mic, the Sennheiser D33. I think I heard somewhere that John Lennon's favorite vocal mic was an SM57. For those listening, it's just a cheap stage mic. If it works for you, it works.
Yeah, for sure. It helps if you're John Lennon or Prince, doesn't it?
Very true. Very true. Yeah. Yeah. They got a sound they were pleased with, and we're off to the races.
For sure.
Just wondering, you record all of this stuff. There's loads of stuff. There's more than can be released at the time. And so you create the vault and you look for the other tracks that he's done before when he's with you. When you're creating the vault, is it just about necessity? Because you're saying that you're a fan. Is there a fan at work when you're creating something like the vault, thinking, I want to hear everything, I want to have everything, when you're initially creating it? Or is it just out of necessity at the time?
It was out of necessity. I was just hoping to not be fired. When I joined him, he would ask, sometimes he'd say, bring up this tape. And I was brand new to Minneapolis. I didn't know anybody there. And I had to find these tapes. So out of necessity, I had to have a system for cataloging all of his recorded material from the past. And it needed to be all in one place in case he needed it. He had tapes in studios in Minneapolis. He had them at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles and a few other LA studios. He had tapes all over the place. So I needed to know where everything was. And the office staff were kind enough to, they got me a 1983 version of a computer. I was too busy to do all the data entry, so eventually they did it. And we came up with a system for cataloging everything just so I could find his tapes. He, in turn, when he realized, oh, this is a thing, he got totally into it. He was really happy to have the vault. At first, he really didn't care where his old tapes were. He was busy thinking of other things. But once he realized, oh, this is cool. We have a catalog and a system for keeping all of his tapes. Then that added fuel to what it was we were doing. And when we designed and built Paisley Park Studios, the design included a proper bank vault with shelves for tape storage. And isn't it great we did that, because the Universal Music Group had that big fire in, 2007 or 8? And so many tapes were lost to history, not Prince's.
Speaking of that, obviously, I don't know if you know, recently the estate on their socials have posted that the vault is free. And a lot of people don't know what that means. Yeah, no one knows. Have you had any recent conversations with the estate recently?
Yes, last June I went to Celebration. They invited me and they gave me an award, and I spoke to Londell McMillan at Paisley, and who's head of the estate. He and his legal partner Charles. Londell and I got to know each other and speak for a long time. So recently I have had conversations with them. It's a difficult problem that they're trying to solve. They're trying to we knew this when Prince passed. It was obvious that folks who would be interested in his legacy would include the fans, the old fans, the existing fans, new fans, future fans, scholars and historians, and then the money people. He did some recordings while he was signed to Warner Brothers and other recordings while he was signed to other labels, and they all have a stake in this, not to mention the state of Minnesota and just whatever fees you have to pay, or whatever, I don't know, taxes or whatever you have to do to financially stay in business. So it's a massive problem to solve. And I think from what I could see, Londell is doing the best that he can do. It's never going to please everyone,
No.
but they are trying in good faith. Let me put it that way, in good faith.
That's good to know. It's really
Yeah.
intimate.
Yeah.
It wasn't always that way. Londell wasn't in the picture in the early years after Prince passed away, and there were some terrible mistakes made, but some good people were involved. I mentioned Michael Howe from Warner Brothers. Yeah, there were really good people involved, and then there were some people who were not so good, and I don't think those folks are still around.
Susan, thank you so much for coming. I can see just from the faces of everybody else involved, this has been such a joyful conversation. It's been so wonderful to kind of, so often when I've been listening to Prince music, especially kind of having him as a musician who's been at the board and done some recording, I imagine myself in your seat. So a lot of the time when I'm recording, I'm picturing my hands on the faders, and a lot of what I wanted to know, and not just of the actual nuts and bolts of it, but the emotional part of being there when somebody that good, that important is creating something that I think you spoke about your shared like teenage trauma with Prince and the work that you guys created together. I think for a lot of us, me definitely, it informed and was a company to our teenage traumas and really has brought us with us, which is why we're asking these questions. And thank you so much for being so generous with your time, with your answers, and with your memories. And I just can't thank you enough.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. I join you in being a fan of popular music, and I join you in loving those studio stories. Andrew Hickey is a godsend. I love his podcast because he's taking me right into the studio for some of the records that I loved, giving me letting me have the fantasies that I enjoy so much. He's going to do 500 episodes, and he's up to episode maybe in the 179, 180, something like that. This guy's got years to go. His episode on the Grateful Dead was 4 hours long.
Oh, wow.
That's this guy. That's this guy. He's a scholar, and he aims to put you right there. And he does a lot of research. It takes him a while to prepare a podcast. I thank you for your interest and your questions, because it allows me to contribute to, future episodes that are talking about what it was like to be in the studio with Prince.